My brother set down his beer, leaned back in his chair, and smiled the way he always did when he thought he'd already won. "You won't last a month," he said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. It was Thanksgiving. The kind with too many candles and not enough honesty, and every single person in that dining room turned to look at me. My aunt. My uncle. My brother's wife, Cassandra, who pressed her lips together like she was trying not to laugh. My stepfather, Gerald, who just refilled his glass and looked away. My brother's name is Derek. He is 38 years old, runs a landscaping company that my mother helped him start, and has never once in his life been told no by anyone in our family. Not really. Not in a way that stuck. I put my fork down. I didn't say anything. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly beside my plate, pushed back my chair, and stood up. Derek's smile faltered just slightly, just enough for me to see it, and then I walked to the front door, took my coat from the hook, and stepped outside into the cold November air. Behind me, the table erupted. My stepfather's voice rose first, then Cassandra's, then my aunt saying my name in that particular tone she used whenever she thought I was embarrassing the family. I didn't go back. I stood on the front porch of the house I had grown up, in the house that was technically my mother's, the house I had been quietly managing for 3 years since her illness had made it impossible for her to do it herself. And I looked out at the driveway full of cars, and I breathed. My mother, Diane, had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia 2 years before she died. She passed 8 months before that Thanksgiving dinner. In the months between her diagnosis and her death, I had moved back home. I had managed her medications, her appointments, her finances, her property taxes, her insurance renewals. I had done it quietly, without complaint, because she was my mother and she needed me, and because no one else was willing to step in. Derek visited on holidays. Cassandra sent flowers on her birthday. Gerald, her second husband, and technically my stepfather since I was 12, handled exactly nothing. What I did not know, what none of them knew, or so I believed, was that my mother had spent those same months doing something quietly of her own. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't look at it. The cold stung my cheeks, but I didn't go back inside. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the porch behind me, and I tensed, expecting Derek. But the voice that spoke was soft. "She left something for you." I turned. It was my mother's neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher who had known my mother for over 20 years and who had shown up uninvited to Thanksgiving dinner every year since my mother got sick because, as she put it, someone ought to keep an eye on things. She was holding a small envelope, cream-colored. My name written across the front in my mother's handwriting, which had gotten shakier in her final months, but was still unmistakably hers. "She gave it to me last spring," Mrs. Holloway said quietly. "She told me to give it to you when the time felt right." She pressed it into my hand. "I think the time is right." I stared at the envelope for a long moment. My phone buzzed again. From inside the house, I could hear Derek's voice getting louder. Something about access codes and the storage unit, and what did I think I was doing? I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket without opening it. "Thank you," I said. Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Your mother was a smart woman," she said. "Smarter than most people gave her credit for." Then she went back inside, and I walked to my car, and I drove away. I checked into a motel 20 minutes from the house. It wasn't elegant thin curtains, a heater that clicked and shuddered, but it was quiet, and quiet was what I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on and my mother's envelope in my hands, and I let myself feel the weight of it before I opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a business card. The business card read, "Helen Marsh, estate attorney." Handwritten on the back in my mother's writing were 4 words. "She knows everything already." The letter was short. My mother's handwriting was unsteady but deliberate. She had chosen every word. "My darling," it began. "If you're reading this, then something happened at a family gathering that made you finally decide you'd had enough. I know you. I know how long you will hold on before you let go. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better while I was still there to do it. But I did the next best thing. I built something for you that they cannot touch. Go see Helen. Go soon. I love you more than any of them ever understood, Mom." I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a very long time. My phone had 31 missed calls by the time I turned it over. 11 from Derek, 7 from Cassandra, 6 from Gerald, 4 from my aunt, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. There were text messages layered underneath all of it, most of them some variation of, "Call me back immediately. This is not a game. You are making a scene." I turned the phone face down and lay back on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling. My mother had not been a wealthy woman by any traditional measure. She had a house, a modest investment account she had built slowly over 30 years, a small life insurance policy, and a storage unit full of furniture she had always meant to deal with. None of it was a fortune, but all of it mattered. What I had never fully understood until I sat in Helen Marsh's office the following morning was just how carefully my mother had arranged every single piece of it. Helen Marsh was 60, silver-haired, and had the particular quiet confidence of someone who had seen every version of family dysfunction that money and grief could produce. She stood when I walked in and shook my hand and said, "I've been expecting you for a while now," and something about the way she said it made my throat tighten. I sat down. She opened a folder. "Your mother came to me 4 years ago," she said. "Not long after your brother filed the petition." I went still. "What petition?" Helen slid a document across the desk. I stared at it. It was a petition for conservatorship filed by Derek, 3 weeks after my mother's official diagnosis, that would have given him legal control over her financial and medical decisions. The petition had been dismissed. My mother had filed a counter-response herself with Helen's help, and the case had been closed. I had never known any of it had happened. "She didn't want to worry you," Helen said when she saw my expression, "and she wanted to handle it herself." She did. I pressed my hand over my mouth. My brother had tried to take legal control of my mother while she was sick, while I was living in her house, taking care of her every day. He had done it without telling me, without asking me, without a single conversation. "What else?" I said. Helen opened the folder wider. My mother's house, the one I had grown up in, the one Derek assumed would pass to him, was in my name. She had transferred the deed 14 months before she died, through a properly executed legal transaction, recorded with the county, entirely above board. The investment account, just over $90,000, had been placed in a trust with me as sole trustee and beneficiary, with protective language that prevented any other family member from contesting or accessing it without a court order. The life insurance policy listed me as the only beneficiary. It had been updated 2 years before she died. There was also a storage unit. I had known about it but assumed it was full of old furniture. It was not full of old furniture. It contained 3 bankers' boxes of financial records, correspondence, and documentation that my mother had assembled over the course of 4 years. A record of everything. She was meticulous, Helen said quietly. My hands were shaking. "He tried to take control of her while she was sick," I said, "and she never told me." "She told me instead," Helen said. "And we made sure that if he ever tried again, or if anyone in your family tried to challenge what she had built for you, you would be protected." I looked down at the table. The folder was still open in front of me, page after page of documents bearing my name, my mother's signature, notary seals, county stamps, an entire architecture of protection built quietly, without my knowledge, while I had been driving her to appointments and counting out her medications and holding her hand during the hard nights. She had been building walls for me while I thought I was just getting through the days. "What happens now?" I asked. Helen folded her hands. "Now your family discovers that nothing they assumed belongs to them actually does, and then they come to you. The question is what you do when they get there." I picked up the business card still in my coat pocket. 4 words on the back in my mother's handwriting. "She knows everything already." "I follow your lead," I said. "Derek found out about the house first. I learned this because Gerald called me at 7:45 in the morning 2 days after Thanksgiving, before I had even finished my coffee, and his voice had the particular clipped quality of a man who had convinced himself he was being calm. "There's apparently an issue with the property records," he said. "Derek's real estate contact ran the deed and your name is on it. That needs to be corrected." "It doesn't need to be corrected," I said. "It's correct." A long pause. Diane would not have intended that. Diane did intend that, I said. She did it herself, 14 months ago with an attorney. It's recorded with the county. Another pause, longer this time. You need to come home and talk to your brother. I don't need to do that, I said. I hung up. My phone rang 4 more times in the next hour. I didn't answer. I drove to Helen's office instead, and sat across from her, and told her what had happened, and she nodded with the expression of someone who had predicted exactly this. They'll escalate, she said. Probably today. Definitely this week. She was right. By noon, Derek had left a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I played it exactly once. Standing in the parking lot of a grocery store, watching a woman load bags into her car, his voice started controlled and got progressively less so. He used the phrase she would have wanted 11 times. He accused me of manipulating our mother. He said I had isolated her. He said she hadn't been in her right mind. He said this wasn't over. I saved the voicemail. Helen had told me to save everything. Cassandra texted that evening. Cassandra's texts always arrived in small, punishing batches, 3 or 4 messages sent in rapid succession, each one escalating slightly from the last. You have no idea what you've done. Derek is devastated. This family is falling apart and it's your fault. Your mother would be ashamed. I read them. I set the phone down. I thought about my mother's handwriting on that cream-colored envelope and the particular care with which she had formed each letter even when her hands weren't steady anymore. I didn't reply. The call from the bank came the following morning. A courteous representative explained that someone had attempted to access my mother's investment account using her old PIN, an account that had, as of 14 months ago, been transferred into a trust bearing my name. The access attempt had been denied. Would I like to update my contact information on the account? Yes, I said. I would. I called Helen immediately after. Your brother tried to access your mother's investment account, I said. I assumed that would happen. She was quiet for a moment. There's something else you should know. Go to the storage unit today if you can. Your mother left specific instructions in a sealed envelope inside the 3rd box on the left. She asked that you open it only after your family had attempted to access an account or property in her name. I stood very still in the parking lot of the motel I was still staying in, because I couldn't quite bring myself to go back to the house yet. She really did think of everything, I said. She thought of nothing else for about 3 years, Helen said quietly. The storage unit was 20 minutes away, a climate-controlled facility on the edge of town where my mother had rented a 10 by 10 unit for longer than I could remember. I had the code. The key was on my keychain. I had always assumed she kept seasonal decorations in it. Inside were 3 banker's boxes, neatly labeled in my mother's handwriting. Taxes, correspondence, records. The sealed envelope was in the 3rd box. On top, my name in her handwriting. Below it, in smaller letters. Open after first account access attempt. I sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit with my back against the wall and opened the envelope. There were 2 items inside, a USB drive and a letter. The letter was longer than the first one. She had written it when her handwriting was still steadier, which told me she had prepared it earlier, planned earlier than I had imagined. My darling, she began again. If you're reading this, then Derek has already started reaching. I knew he would. I want you to understand that I am not angry at him. I am sad for him, the way I am sad for anyone who was given too much too easily and never learned that things have limits. But sad is not the same as willing to let him have what he didn't earn and what was never his to take. I kept reading. The USB drive contains recordings. Some are audio, some are video. Over the past 3 years, I recorded several conversations in the kitchen, in the living room, on phone calls I placed on speaker while you were out. I did this because I saw what was happening and I wanted you to have proof that I was not confused, that I understood, that the decisions I made were mine, made clearly and with full awareness. The recordings document your brother's attempts to access my accounts, his conversations with Cassandra about the house, and a conversation with Gerald, in which Gerald suggested I update my will to prioritize Derek's family because, and I want you to read these words carefully, you would be fine on your own. I stopped reading. I pressed the back of my hand over my mouth. Outside, someone drove past the storage facility. A normal afternoon. The ordinary world continuing at its ordinary pace while I sat on a concrete floor reading my dead mother's words. You would be fine on your own. She had heard that. She had recorded it. And then she had made sure that fine on my own was exactly what I would be, not because I had no choice, but because she had made it possible. I finished the letter. I put the USB drive in my coat pocket. I sat there for a while longer, in the quiet of the storage unit surrounded by my mother's boxes, and let myself feel all of it, the grief and the gratitude and the anger and the love all at once, without trying to manage any of it. Then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, locked the unit, and called Helen. I have recordings, I said. Her voice changed slightly, not dramatically, just enough. How many? I haven't counted. A full USB drive. A breath. Your mother, she said, and then stopped, and then started again. Bring them today. Derek showed up at the house 3 days later. I was there because I had finally gone back to collect some of my things, and to meet with a locksmith. Helen had recommended a precaution, she said. Now that the deed was clearly in my name and clearly contested by my brother, I was in the kitchen when I heard his truck in the driveway. I watched through the window as he got out, and then Cassandra got out, and then Gerald got out of a separate car. All three of them, walking toward the front door of a house that legally belonged to me. I called Helen before I answered the door. They're here, I said. Don't let them in, she said. You do not have to let them in. I'm calling the county non-emergency line now as a precaution. Do not argue, do not explain. You owe them nothing. I hung up. I stood in the hallway of my mother's house, my house, and I listened to Derek knock, and then knock harder, and then ring the doorbell 3 times in a row like he was 12 years old and impatient for dinner. I opened the door. He looked exactly like he always did when he expected something to go his way. Jaw set, shoulders back. The expression of a man who has never genuinely feared that he might not get what he came for. Cassandra stood slightly behind him. Gerald had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the porch railing instead of at me. We need to talk, Derek said. Okay, I said. I didn't move from the doorway. Inside. No, I said. He blinked. In 31 years of being his sister, I had said no to him fewer times than I could count on one hand. Each time I had, he had found a way to make me unsay it, or to route around it, or to make me feel guilty enough that no became yes eventually. He had no framework for a no that held. This is ridiculous, Cassandra said. We just want to understand what happened. Your attorney can contact my attorney, I said. Her name is Helen Marsh. You can find her number online. You have an attorney, Derek repeated. I do. Gerald finally looked up from the porch railing. Your mother would not have wanted this. Something settled in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. Clean and cold and absolute. You told her I'd be fine on my own, I said. Do you remember that? You told her she should update her will to prioritize Derek's family because I would be fine on my own. Gerald's face went very still. She recorded that conversation, I said. She recorded a lot of conversations. The silence on the porch lasted long enough for me to notice a bird in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Derek's jaw had stopped being set. Cassandra was very quiet. Gerald had gone the color of old paper. You're bluffing, Derek said finally. My attorney has the USB drive, I said. The recordings are authenticated. You can hear Mom's voice on every one of them, explaining what she was doing and why, in her own words, to make absolutely certain that no one could ever claim she was confused. Another silence. Longer. This isn't over, Derek said, but his voice had lost something. The certainty had gone out of it. What was left underneath sounded smaller, and, underneath that, frightened. It actually is, I said. I didn't take anything from you. I never had anything you wanted until you decided you wanted it. Mom saw what you were doing and she protected me. That's all that happened. I stepped back and closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the door for a long time, listening to them on the porch. Low voices. Then the sound of feet on the steps. Then 2 car doors, 3 car doors, engines starting, Tires on the gravel driveway. Then silence. My phone buzzed. A text from Helen. Sheriff's non-emergency noted your address. If they return without invitation, you have grounds to file. Are you okay? I typed back. I'm okay. I walked through my mother's house, my house, slowly. The kitchen where she had made coffee every morning at 6:15. The sunroom where she kept her plants, all of which I had been keeping alive. The hallway where her coat still hung on the third hook from the left because I hadn't been able to move it yet. I stood in front of her coat for a long time. Then I went and made myself a cup of tea, and I sat in the sunroom surrounded by her plants, and I let the quiet settle around me. The formal legal meeting happened 6 weeks later, in a conference room at Helen's office. Derek had retained an attorney, a man named Stafford who wore a very nice suit and arrived 12 minutes late, and spent the first 5 minutes of the meeting implying, with great professional delicacy, that my mother had perhaps not been entirely competent when she had made her estate decisions. Helen let him finish. Then she opened the binder. The recordings came first, not played aloud in the room, but transcribed, excerpted, and authenticated, with documentation from a forensic audio specialist confirming that the voices were consistent with my mother's voice profile and recorded on dates consistent with the metadata on the USB drive. The transcripts showed my mother narrating her decisions clearly and coherently, explaining exactly what she was doing and why, including on the day she had signed the deed transfer, on which she had also recorded herself explaining the transfer in her own words to a witness. Then came the conservatorship petition, Derek's name on the filing, the date, the dismissal, my mother's counter-response, which she had written herself, and which was, if anything, sharper and more legally coherent than the petition it was responding to. Then came the bank records documenting the access attempt on the investment account after my mother's death, time-stamped to 2 days after Thanksgiving. Stafford reviewed each document slowly. His nice suit didn't help him. Derek sat across from me with his hands flat on the table. At some point during the presentation, he stopped looking at the documents and started looking at the table instead. Cassandra wasn't in the room. She had apparently decided at the last minute not to attend, which Helen had quietly noted was telling. Gerald wasn't there either. When Helen finished, the room was quiet. The estate is valid, Stafford said eventually. He said it to the table more than to anyone in particular. Yes, said Helen. It is. Derek looked up. He looked at me for a long time with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not remorse exactly, not apology. Something more complicated and less resolved. The expression of someone who has been running so long on assumption that the absence of it leaves him genuinely uncertain of where to stand. She really chose you, he said. She chose what was right, I said. She chose what she saw happening and did something about it. I didn't ask her to. He looked back down at the table. I watched something in his face work through itself. When he looked up again, whatever had been working was still unresolved, but his voice was quieter. Stafford, he said, we're done here. They left. Helen walked them to the door. I stayed at the conference table and looked out the window at the gray December sky and breathed. When Helen came back, she sat down across from me and said nothing for a moment. Then, that went better than most. He didn't apologize, I said. No, she said. But he didn't fight it either. People like your brother usually need time to understand what losing actually means. Some of them figure it out. Some of them don't. I thought about Derek in the truck, in the driveway of our mother's house. I thought about Cassandra's texts. I thought about Gerald's voice on a recording I had listened to once, and never wanted to listen to again. What do I do now? I asked. Whatever you want, Helen said. And then, almost gently, that's the point. I went back to the house that evening. I made dinner in my mother's kitchen, in my kitchen now, and I ate it at the table where Diane used to do the crossword puzzle every morning before anyone else woke up. Afterward, I walked through the sunroom and checked on the plants. I watered the one on the far left that always seemed to need a little extra. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Holloway next door. Lights are on. Glad you're home. I stood at the window looking out at the dark yard, the oak tree bare in December, the ordinary street beyond it. My mother had sat at this window for 20 years. She had looked out at this same street and figured out how to build something that would outlast her, something that would hold, something that no one could take apart no matter how hard they pushed. She had done it quietly, without asking for credit, without telling me it was happening. I opened my contacts and found her name still in my phone, the way it stays even after it shouldn't. Diane. I didn't call it, I just held the phone and looked at it. I see it now, I said to the quiet kitchen. I understand what you did. The plants were green and alive and thriving. The house was warm. The paperwork was filed and signed and done. Outside, the first snow of December had started to fall soft, unhurried, settling over the yard in the slow way of things that have decided they are exactly where they belong. I stayed at the window for a long time, watching it come down. If you've ever been told by someone who claimed to love you that you couldn't survive without them, I want you to know that sometimes the best thing a person can do is let them believe it. Let them believe it right up until the moment they realize they had it exactly backward. Leave your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. And if this meant something to you, subscribe, there are more stories coming. And I'd be honored to share them with you.